Welcome back to these series of lectures. We've talked about Columbus in some depth, and I said I wanted to look at two of the consequences of the Columbian Exchange, Atlantic slavery and imperialism. European imperialism is, you can look at the map here and see that the New World is being sliced up like a big pizza. Following Columbus, of course, and it'll take a century for some of the other nations to get involved in this, but the English and the French and others will begin carving out enclaves in the New World for themselves. They'll begin to establish colonies. You have the Portuguese colony, of course, in Brazil, the English colonies along the eastern seaboard of what today we call the United States. You have the Spanish Empire, New Spain, started by Columbus in the Caribbean, extending into Mexico, into what today we'd call the southwestern portion of the United States and California, and then down into South America as well. The French are going to establish New France in the New World. And this will be centered in what today we would call Canada, along the St. Lawrence Seaway and the Great Lakes. Now, for the purposes of this lecture, I'm going to focus on New France. And we're going to do this in two segments. First part of this lecture, we're going to talk about the French and the Huronian Indians. You've heard of Lake Huron, one of the Great Lakes. This is the geographic area that we're dealing with here. Lake Huron, named obviously for the Huronians. So I don't have the time to go into a comprehensive look at European imperialism or colonization. So what we'll do is look at one specific imperial project, that of the French. Now, I call this lecture the middle ground, and here's why. It's not a physical place that you go to. It is a psychological place that you go to in your mind. Both the French and the Indians will have to partake of the middle ground in order to accommodate one another, to compromise with each other, to try to figure out a way to live peaceably and profitably together. The middle ground is necessary because neither the French nor the Indians can simply impose their will. So they have to compromise and accommodate. Now, there's another factor here. Not only are the two sides unable to impose their will, but both sides view the other as being potentially beneficial, as trading partners, as perhaps allies in the case of conflict with another tribe. So I want to look at the Huronian Indians, and I want to look at the French, and I want to briefly talk about the advantages or disadvantages for each side. Now, for the French, I'm going to focus primarily on the Jesuits, and there's a reason for this. The Jesuits are the ones who left detailed records. So our knowledge of this time period in the 16th, 17th centuries, 18th century, in New France, our knowledge of this comes from the Jesuit records. The historian Richard White wrote a book, title was The Middle Ground, and he goes in depth in this topic. So that's where this lecture is coming from. So I want to look at strengths and weaknesses of the Jesuits and of the Huronians. Now, the other French that are here, administrators and French fur traders especially, I don't want to neglect them, but I want to focus more on the Jesuits because they are the ones who left the detailed records. So let's look at strengths and weaknesses of the Jesuits, and we'll do strengths first. The Indians recognize that the Jesuits are serious and courageous people. They've come to this strange continent. They're living with strange people whose languages they're just learning, whose customs they're unfamiliar with. It takes a lot of guts to do this, and these Jesuits are very devout, pious, and learned men. And they're perfectly trained, and they have the mindset, the psychological strength to undertake this dangerous mission. They go off into the wilds of North America with the strange people, And the Indians recognize that takes a lot of courage. Other strengths that the Jesuits possess, well, they apparently have some connection or control over this new powerful Christian God that appears to be killing the Indians. So this inspires both awe and probably disgust on the part of the Indians to think that the Jesuits are connected with the massive die-off of Indians. Other strengths of the Jesuits, well, they're celibate, so they're not chasing Indian women, unlike French fur traders who do. Other strengths, the Jesuits are literate. Their literacy is going to give them an advantage over the Indians, who are a people of oral tradition. How about weaknesses for the Jesuits? One weakness is the inability of the Jesuits to reciprocate with the Indians, to reciprocate, to give back to. Indian society is based on this idea of reciprocity. I do for you, and therefore you do for me, an exchange. The Jesuits, of course, have nothing to give back. If you put yourself in the shoes of the Huronians, you see that we're giving the Jesuits food and shelter and protection and medical care. And what are the Jesuits giving back to us? Well, nothing. They have nothing to give back. They've taken a vow of poverty, a rejection of the material world. And the only thing the Jesuits have to give the Indians is Christian salvation, which is a dubious proposition at best. So the lack of reciprocity is a weakness. What else? The Jesuits have a tendency to criticize the Indians for their sex lives. And of course this gets tiresome. The Jesuits admonish the Indians for what looks like sin or promiscuity. Indian women, as they reach their maturity, are encouraged to experiment sexually with multiple partners. Once they marry, they're expected to be faithful. But prior to marriage, this experimentation is encouraged. To the Jesuit priest, of course, this looks like sin. And the Jesuits admonish the Indians for their sex lives. Of course, the Jesuits are celibate. And the Indians, as you can imagine, get a little tired of hearing this criticism, especially from Jesuit priests who appear to want to make up the rules for a game they don't even play. Now, what other weaknesses do the Jesuits possess? Well, in these northern latitudes, you have a short summer, and from the bogs and lakes and other waterways, there emerges voracious mosquitoes and black flies who will eat you alive. Now, the Indians fight this by smearing animal fat all over their bodies. This creates a protective sheen and protects the Indians from these irritating bites. The Jesuit priests are reluctant to smear animal fat all over their bodies. They regard that as somewhat repugnant. This may sound trivial, but if you think about multiple bites, scratching, infection, there are no med-first in New France. And of course, infections can be quite serious. This reminds me of another Jesuit weakness, is the fact that, like most European men, they wear beards, facial hair. The Indians regard this as repulsive. It looks, to the Indians, a beard looks like a food trap or a place for insects to nest. And you'll notice the Indians do not have facial hair. So, strengths and weaknesses of the Jesuits. What about the Huronians? Their strengths, well, they have great self-confidence in their culture. They believe their culture to be superior to that of the Europeans. The Huronians are very good at turning Europeans into Indians. This happens in a couple different ways, sometimes through kidnapping. A European child could be kidnapped by the Indians and grow up in Indian society and prefer to stay there. And sometimes adult Europeans will willingly leave their settlements and join the Indians, as that lifestyle is more appealing. Other strengths for the Indians, well, it's kind of a home court advantage, isn't it? We are playing in their territory. They know how to hunt and fish here and how to survive in this rough country. Advantage is polytheism. The Indians are polytheistic. So if they choose to do so, they can simply incorporate this new powerful Christian God into their already existing pantheon of gods. Of course, this does not please the Jesuits, who are monotheistic. Weaknesses for the Indians? First and foremost, they have no immunity to these the various European pathogens brought over. Again, smallpox being the biggest of the killers. Another weakness, the Indians become dependent on European trade goods. And a relationship based on dependency usually has tension and problems. It's like a bad marriage you can't get out of. So the Indians become addicted to metal items that the Europeans supply them with, whether it's hatchets or knives or firearms or pots and pans or what have you. And of course, the Indians are a people of oral tradition. Their lives based on ritual and repetition. The Europeans are going to be a little quicker on their feet, able to improvise and use their literacy to their advantage as we go forward. So these are strengths and weaknesses of the two sides. In the next segment, we'll pick this up by looking at how the middle ground works in 4 distinct areas: trade, justice, sex, and war. And we'll take up that next time. Thank you.